Your husband tweeted after Justice Brett Kavanaugh left a Washington restaurant due to protesters. The tweet reads, "Sounds like he just wanted some privacy to make his own dining decisions." Is that appropriate, sir?
Look, when public officials go into public life, we should expect two things. One, you should always be free from violence, harassment, and intimidation. And two, you're never going to be free from criticism or peaceful protest, people exercising their First Amendment rights. Okay. And that's what happened in this case. Remember, the justice never even came into contact with these protesters, reportedly didn't see or hear them. And these protesters are upset because a right, an important right, that the majority of Americans support was taken away. Understood. Not only the right to choose, by the way, but this justice was part of the process of stripping away the right to privacy. As long as I've been alive, settled case law in the United States has been that the Constitution protected a right to privacy, and that has now been thrown out the window by justices, including Justice Kavanaugh, who, as I recall, swore up and down in front of God and everyone, including the United States Congress, that they were going to leave settled case law alone. So yes, people are upset. They're going to exercise their First Amendment rights. And as long as that's peaceful, that's protected. Compare that, for example, to the reality that as a country, right now, we're reckoning with the fact that a mob summoned by the former president
let me follow up, Mr. Secretary.
attacked the United States Capitol for the purpose of overthrowing the election and very nearly succeeded in preventing the peaceful transfer of power. But I think common sense can tell the difference.
But as a high-profile public figure, sir, are you comfortable with protesters protesting when you and your husband go to dinner at a restaurant?
Protesting peacefully outside in a public space? Sure. Look, I can't even tell you the number of spaces, venues, and scenarios where I've been protested. And the bottom line is this. Any public figure should always be free from violence, intimidation, and harassment, but should never be free from criticism or people exercising their First Amendment rights.
First off, why these bargain basement Fox hosts continue to think that they can score a gotcha on Pete Buttigieg is just so beyond my comprehension. I know the people who need to hear this won't, but to those Fox hosts out there, you will not trip up Buttigieg on air because he is smarter than you. Now, as far as the issue at hand goes, I find it so incredibly rich that the right is trying to defend Kavanaugh's whining about privacy weeks after Kavanaugh quite literally ruled against the right to privacy by overturning Roe, a decision that puts a slew of other constitutional rights to privacy at risk too. Like, what's next? Kavanaugh whining that protesters are taking away the choice of restaurants he feels comfortable eating at? The simple fact, as Pete Buttigieg laid out far more eloquently than I can, is that it doesn't matter how uncomfortable public officials are with protest, that so long as it's peaceful, our free speech is constitutionally protected in this country. And it really is rich that we have to constantly explain that to a conservative majority that can't stop kissing American flags and shoving down everyone's throats how patriotic they are. And frankly, Brett Kavanaugh should be the first person as the United States Supreme Court Justice to come out and defend the rights of those people to peacefully protest. Of course, then it would be more difficult to play the victim, and honestly, without victimhood, what would Republicans even have left? I also find it especially telling that Fox and the right-wing media ecosystem more broadly are so hell-bent on making the issue here about Brett Kavanaugh's personal discomfort, as if he's the only person in this country entitled to any comfort, and so he can help rip 50 years of rights away from women without a second thought. But God forbid Brett Kavanaugh can't eat his precious steak dinner completely insulated from a single word of criticism. God forbid Brett Kavanaugh is even mildly inconvenienced in the same week that he helped tear bodily autonomy away from hundreds of millions of Americans. So I'm sorry that Brett Kavanaugh was persecuted by the mere knowledge of a protest that he couldn't even see or hear, but someone should let him and his lackeys know that Kavanaugh is not the victim here. And by the way, you can even tell that this Fox host knew he didn't have a leg to stand on here. While Buttigieg was schooling him, all this guy could do was desperately try to eke out, okay, all to try to get Buttigieg to stop talking, which of course Pete had no intention of doing. And then after all of that, when the Fox host finally got his follow-up opportunity, all he could conjure up was, well, are you comfortable at restaurants if you're protested? And Pete was like, if it's peaceful, sure. Because the difference between Pete Buttigieg and these Republicans is that only one of them understands that the Constitution doesn't only apply when it's convenient for you personally. But sure, constitutional originalists or whatever. And yet none of this is the least bit surprising. When the Roe decision first broke, all Fox could pretend to be outraged about was the leak, as if the real issue here is Supreme Court protocol. And now that the decision's been passed down and Americans are rightfully letting their voices be heard, Fox is again pretending that Kavanaugh's dinner protests are the issue at hand here. In other words, they will point to anything to deflect from the fact that Republicans have just stripped hundreds of millions of Americans of autonomy over their own bodies. It is a decision that a paltry 30% of Americans agree with, so I can understand why Fox and the rest of the GOP want to distract you with whatever tepid deflection they can come up with, but they're not fooling anyone. No one is going to sleep in this country worried about Brett Kavanaugh's dinner plans. They're going to sleep worried that their 10-year-old daughters who've just been raped will have to carry their rapist baby to term. They're going to sleep worried that a little girl who's been molested by her father will have to give birth to her sister. They're worried that doctors will be prosecuted for performing a life-saving abortion for a woman with an ectopic pregnancy or who's been miscarrying. They're worried that regardless of the reason, they won't have a choice over what happens with their own bodies. That's what people care about. And yes, even the people who watch Fox News. So I get that Brett Kavanaugh wants to eat his fillets in ideal conditions, but honestly, and I mean this with every ounce of disrespect, he can fuck all the way off. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And to support my work beyond that, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I cover the week's most important stories and interview the biggest players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, and so many more. The link is also right here on this screen. And finally, to take action yourself and sign petitions on the most important issues, go to briantylercohen.com/petition.